Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Josh Fan of ShowMeFootball.com, and we got some stuff to talk about today. Kansas City Chiefs. I don't know what we're gonna call this video yet. Like an intervention, just a rant. I mean, I've made one of these pretty much after all the losses by now, all the games. So there haven't been many wins to talk about. So it's been a lot of the same stuff, and I'm just gonna sit here and I'm really just gonna continue to say the same stuff, a lot of the same stuff. With some new stuff sprinkled in that I've been saying for the longest time. And I just, what do you even say anymore? Like, I used to come on here, and I said this on the Kingdom Crew podcast last night, but I used to come on here screaming and yelling and ranting and, screaming, shouting from the mountaintop about all my concerns with this team. But now I just expect it, and it's who they are, and it's hard to even get upset anymore. And that's the worst thing about it, is it's getting to the point where I'm starting not to care because I've just accepted what this team is and that it's not going to get better this year. And I know there's still somehow eternal optimists out there. I know there's a lot of you watching this that consider yourself optimists, but if I'm being honest, and look, I'm going to be unfiltered this video. Like, I've had enough. I feel it's been a while since I've been, unprofessional on my channel, getting real upset, but fuck it. I mean, why the fuck would you be optimistic about this team? Seriously. I mean, there's no reason to be optimistic about it, guys. We are 7 weeks into the season. The gut punch, wake-up call stuff, that has all passed the Chiefs by. Like, enough of that. They're just not good at all. And it's not like they had the injury excuse. It's not like 2019 when they had that rough patch, but Chris Jones was injured and Mahomes had the ankle injury and Tyreek was out with the shoulder, and they had the injury excuse. There is no injury excuse. They don't have any help on the horizon. This is their team. And you can't compare this to the Bucs last year either, when they went 7-5 and then didn't lose a game for the rest of the season, because that Bucs team wasn't getting their asses kicked by opponents that they used to roll over, This is different. It's a lot different. This Chiefs team doesn't have the same feel to it. It doesn't have the same look to it. They're not that team. You can forget about them being a Super Bowl contender this year. You can forget about them winning the AFC West this year. And I'm not quite sure they make the playoffs. I think a lot of people after the first couple losses of the season were going, oh, well, they'll still win 12, 13 games. Are we sure about that? Are we sure that they even make a wild card? Because they're already at 4 losses, guys. They're below 500 at 4 losses, and they have Dallas and Green Bay coming up on their schedule soon. Do they win either of those? Or either of those even a close game? Nothing that they've shown so far should tell you that it is. I told people when this team, played like shit against Washington and still pulled it out, that, guys, it's the Washington football team. They're one of the worst teams in the league this year. They should have beat them, and they struggled with them in the entire first half, and everyone was like, oh, here we go. They fixed it. They turned around. Everyone will remember this point in the Washington game when they rip off, 10 straight wins. No, come on. The Eagles gave them trouble. Like, come on. They are not good. And there's 3 main people to blame for this, and we're going to go over every single one. It's Andy Reid, Brett Veach, Steve Spagnuolo. This is going to be in no particular order, but we'll start with Andy Reid. I'm in no way saying Andy Reid should be fired or anything like that, but for people to act like that his seat isn't even a little warm when you have what a lot of people consider one of the most talented Chiefs teams ever. People had Super Bowl aspirations for them coming into the year. They look like they're not going to make the playoffs. They have the worst turnover rate in the NFL, the worst defense in NFL history to this point. They're horrible with penalties. They're undisciplined, and they look destined for a complete wheels falling off scenario. How can you not be worried about the head coach? I mean, I'm not going to push back on anyone that has something bad to say about Andy Reid. His play calling, I've always thought his play calling was suspect, and his game management has always been an issue, but for the longest time, Patrick Mahomes was able to mask that because he was so good. They would score so many points that we would forget about those second and long runs, or those points where Andy would, go for a field goal instead of going for it on fourth down, which he did yesterday. But that stuff sticks out like a sore thumb whenever you're also losing on top of it. Like, why was Andy Reid kicking a field goal that late into the game, and why were his starters still in the game when it was clearly over and he almost got Mahomes seriously hurt? And there's currently an effort issue on this team, and that, again, falls on the head coach. And I think the players go largely undisciplined. I've talked about examples where Byron Pringle fumbles for 2 straight weeks, still gets to be on kick return team even after that. Or Clyde Edwards-Helaire fumbles the ball for 2 times in 2 straight weeks, and he still gets to be the bell cow back. Or Demarcus Robinson consistently screwing up and still playing 60% of the snaps or more. That shit's got to stop. It's become stale. The offense has become too predictable. Every week after the games, Andy's going, we'll get it fixed. We know it's an issue. We'll figure it out. Well, they're not fucking figuring it out. If anything, it's gotten worse. This is what you get with Andy Reid. This is what you get with a player's coach. This is what Andy Reid's always been. But now that other teams have caught up to the Chiefs and they've whiffed on talent in the draft and in free agency, they don't have that talent gap anymore to cover up for all of Andy Reid's mistakes. And it's becoming more prevalent now that other teams have caught up. All these issues, the flaws are starting to be exposed because it's become too much for Patrick Mahomes to cover up. Then there's Brett Veach. I mean, people call me crazy when I gave him a D as an off-season grade. I made a video way back when, a little ways through the off-season, saying Brett Veach gets a D for the moves that he's made. And people were saying I'm way too negative. I don't know what I'm talking about. And now you're seeing it, guys. I mean, come on. They didn't do enough. They could have had a defensive end. How many weeks have I said this? I mean, this is the definition of insanity, man. How many times have I said they need a defensive end every single week? They can't get pressure. Ryan Tannehill was able to eat them alive. They got no pressure yesterday against the Titans offensive line that was allowing the most sacks in the league. I mean, come on. And it makes it harder on the secondary, even though the secondary isn't that great either. Like, they could have addressed cornerback. Not addressing cornerback in years past is really coming back to bite them. They hit on L'Jarius Sneed in the 4th round in 2020, but you need more than that. Like, come on. The third safety spot, Dan Sorensen shouldn't be playing. Mike Hughes, he was a bust for the Vikings, and he's still a bust now. I never understood why the Chiefs tried to make him a starter, and we'll get into that with Steve Spagnuolo in a minute, who's a big issue. But point blank, Brett Veach is not a good GM. He's a bad talent evaluator, and this is why we're in this situation. The truly great players on this team are Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Chris Jones, and probably Tyrann Mathieu. And Brett Veach added one of those guys. The rest were John Dorsey players. Brett Veach has not added a single elite cornerstone to this team in his 4 years in the organization. Okay? He has not done the job. And even though people give him all this credit for rebuilding the offensive line, it was the one thing he could hang his hat on this offseason, even though he failed at every other juncture. The one thing people could say is that he completely rebuilt the offensive line. And he did. But guess what? The offensive line has been very inconsistent, and it hasn't been what you would say is a strength of this team so far, especially after yesterday. So if the offensive line continues to be an issue, well, then what did Brett Veach really do this offseason to improve the Chiefs? What did he do? The interior is fixed now, but now the tackles are a problem again. And I saw the report yesterday that there were a bunch of defensive players on the trade block, one of them being Melvin Ingram of the Steelers. And Ian Rappaport specifically mentioned the Chiefs as a team who would be interested. And that is an awful look, even though I would love Melvin Ingram, and I think it's a good move if the Chiefs were to make it, although I'm not sure Melvin Ingram really changes much about the trajectory of this team at this point with how bad they are. That is a horrible look when you're now inquiring about a player and you would have to give up an asset to get him when you could have signed him this past offseason and you had him in the building and you let him go. It makes zero sense. It makes this front office look stupid. It makes them look fucking dumb. You literally had Melvin Ingram in Kansas City, in Arrowhead Stadium, let him walk, and then he signed with the Steelers for the exact same base salary that you used to sign Alex Okafor. And I still see people saying this same bullshit that, oh, well, he brought us to 3 straight AFC Championship games and back-to-back Super Bowls. It's not about what you did in the past. It's about creating longevity, maximizing your Super Bowl window, bringing in cheap, cost-controlled talent to help this team stay above and get better. They haven't been getting better So they've been getting worse. Other teams have caught up. Brett Veach has failed. If this team doesn't win a Super Bowl in the next 2 years and they don't make the playoffs this season, it's a colossal failure by Brett Veach. Would everyone agree with that? Okay, well then you can admit that Brett Veach has done a bad job. Can't be both ways. You can't say Brett Veach has done this great job and then just be okay with the fact that they're about to miss the fucking playoffs right after coming off a Super Bowl appearance. And then there's Chiefs fans that are saying, oh, some of you never watched the early 2000s teams, and it really shows. They had rough patches. Those teams didn't have expectations. It's different when you go into the season thinking your team is a Super Bowl contender and probably the best team in the AFC, and they completely shit the bed. That's the fucking difference. Watching the early 2000s Chiefs has nothing to do with this. Must I go over Brett Veach's moves again? He traded a bunch of draft picks and gave $100 million to Frank Clark, who right now should be sitting his ass on the bench. They drafted Clyde Edwards-Helaire, an undynamic running back, with their first-round pick over Trayvon Diggs, over T. Higgins, over Jonathan Taylor. They traded a first-round pick away for Orlando Brown, who doesn't look like he can play in this scheme. They drafted Breeland Speaks with their first overall pick in 2018. They drafted McCole Hardman over DK Metcalf, over A.J. Brown, who killed them yesterday, by the way. McCole Hardman can't even make a fucking catch anymore. And people want to be apologetic for him, saying, oh, well, McColl's still a good player, actually. You just can't get targets on this team when they have Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. No, that's because McCole Hardman isn't good enough to get fucking targets with those guys. They signed Anthony Hitchens to a 4-year, $45 million contract. They made Sammy Watkins, albeit I love Sammy, the highest paid wide receiver in the league at the time. They could have had Fred Warner. They could have had Jesse Bates. They've completely neglected some of these positions like we've talked about. Cornerback and defensive end. Both problems right now. Both positions in which Brett Veach completely ignored this past offseason. Wake the hell up. If you're not willing to have an honest conversation about Brett Veach and the job he's done, I can't talk to you. You can't be taken seriously. I'm sorry. Then there's Steve Spagnuolo, and I think if any of these three guys were to go, Steve Spagnuolo would be the first one, and he's probably the most likely one to end up fired at some point. Honestly, I would not bat an eye if he got fired today. I think the defense has both a talent and a coaching issue. First of all, they still can't get lined up 7 weeks into the season. They don't know where to be. Secondly, even though I think Brett Veach has failed the defense and the coaching staff in a lot of ways by not acquiring the right kind of talent, I don't think the talent is 31st and 32nd in every single defensive statistic bad. I think they're better than that. But part of the problem is Steve Spagnuolo continues to refuse to play the best player at all of these positions. Why the hell was Chris Jones playing at defensive end again this past weekend against the Titans? I thought that was over. I thought he was going back to D-tackle. He started at defensive end and played a bunch of snaps out there. Why? The experiment has failed. Mike Hughes should not see another snap for the rest of the season. Why are you putting him on Julio Jones and man coverage like he can stay with him? And they tried the same thing with him against Mike Williams of the Chargers, and he cooked him. Mike Hughes is not that type of cornerback. Like I said, he was a bust for the Vikings, and he's still a bust now. What makes the Chiefs think they can turn him into an effective starting cornerback? I don't get it. It took Spags 6 weeks to finally fucking figure out that Juan Thornhill should be the deep safety. I am still on the bandwagon that Dorian O'Daniel needs to be playing. Put him at will linebacker. What? I mean, and you saw Nick Bolton in the middle yesterday succeeding. Anthony Hitchens should not start another game at middle linebacker for the Kansas City Chiefs. Nick Bolton had a better game yesterday than Hitchens has ever had as a Chief. But you know Hitchens is going to be starting when he comes back because that's how Spagnuolo operates. The playing of favorites is killing this team. Dorian O'Daniel has the athleticism to do a lot of these things that the Chiefs are asking of their linebackers, and they're playing the far worse athlete and asking them to do all these things. Another thing I don't understand is how Rashad Fenton and DeAndre Baker were two cornerbacks that have actually played pretty well for the Chiefs when they're in the game, and they continually go back to Charvarius Ward and Mike Hughes, who haven't been great. Now, I will say, I think Charvarius Ward should still have a role on this team after what we saw, what the secondary looks like without him. I'm not a huge fan of Ward, though, with that being said. But why is it that Hughes and Ward have put out really bad tape this year. DeAndre Baker comes in, immediately provides spark, and then is back to being a healthy and active. Makes zero sense at all. And Spags cannot coach his teams to cover the flat at all. Multiple times yesterday, the Titans were able to kill the Chiefs on screenplays. A lot of teams have killed the Chiefs on screenplays, but the Chiefs never seemed prepared for it. Why is there no one there, not even a mile within the offensive player, every single time? Like I said, Spagnuolo should open a Buffalo wing shop where they just give out free flats all day, because that's exactly what he's doing as the defensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs. I've heard people say that, nothing really gets fixed with Steve Spagnuolo being fired at this point. What is a midseason firing going to do? I'll tell you what it does. It lights a fire under the players. You finally show that you're not going to put up with mediocrity. You send a message to the team, and people, when they say that, they act like that if you fire Spags, the defense, they can't get any better if you fire him. Well, why not? They rank 31st and 32nd in every major defensive metric. You're telling me a new voice in the room couldn't change any of that? A midseason Steve Spagnuolo firing would be completely justified. I don't know what the hell you guys are talking about. I just don't understand it, man. I'm just disappointed. I really am. And the thing is, I saw it coming, but it still disappointed me. It's like in a movie, a horror movie, when you're watching and a jump scare is coming, but it still gets you when it actually happens. That's what this Chiefs team feels like to me. I thought this was going to happen, and I still just am shocked by the result, even now. I don't think they're making the playoffs. I really don't. That being said, though, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Some more Kansas City Chiefs fans can find this. We can all rant together. You can use my comments to vent. I'd love to hear from you guys, but if you have anything positive to say, you probably shouldn't say it in the comments, or else you're probably going to hear it from me and probably the other people that watch my videos. But, yeah, you can check out my work on showmefootball.com and arrowheadaddict.com. We'll see y'all later.